Hi, my name's Stephen Preston, and today I want to talk to you about getting started with 3D Web. During this presentation, I want to do two things. First of all, I want to convince you that 3D enabling your web pages is something that you actually want to do. And secondly, I want to demonstrate that 3D enabling your web pages is actually really, really easy. You don't even have to write any JavaScript code to do it. Because I'm posting this presentation on an Autodesk YouTube channel, I wanted to insert this little disclaimer before I carried on. The views expressed in this presentation are purely my own. They don't reflect any corporate views of Autodesk. And similarly, my comments, pros and cons for all of the tools I'm looking at are based on my personal experiences getting up and running with those tools. You may very well have different experiences depending on your background, and if you're a vendor of one of these tools and you would like to talk to me either about something I've said about your tool, or if you have a tool that I didn't cover and you think that I should pay attention to it, you're very welcome to contact me on stephen.preston@autodesk.com. So the first part of 3D Web is, why are we doing this? Why is 3D Web something that you should be thinking of? So I'm just going to run a few demos here. I just have a few that I've preloaded here, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things you can do with 3D content on your web pages. So this first example here is actually written using a tool called Play Canvas, which I'll briefly review later on the actual editor. And you can see I can move around here. I can knock these chess pieces over. I can go through this door. This is quite an interactive demo. I can kick these boxes, look up and see the light bulb swinging, run down the corridor, open another door, another swinging light bulb. Let's go out through these double doors, and here we have a giant man-eating plant. Now this is just a kind of walkthrough demo. There's no way of killing the plant or being eaten by the plant, but you can see that you can do some pretty amazing things these days on a web page. Now I'm not expecting that you're going to within 10 minutes get up and write a presentation like this, but this is the kind of thing that is now possible. Let's take a look at another example. This is by using the same tool, using Play Canvas. This is an advertisement for the BMW i8, and you see we have the car that's driving around here. I can modify the colours. Do the interior as well. I can actually flip that around and look inside it. If I click on this button here, it actually opens up the door, lets me inside. Move the steering wheel around, take a look around in the interior, maybe see what different colours look like. So it's a really compelling interactive presentation. And this is really one of the main things about putting 3D on your web page at the moment. It engages your customers more. So instead of bouncing off your page in a couple of minutes, they potentially interact for 5, 10, even 20 minutes with your content if you put something of interest in 3D on your web page. Here's another example. This is actually another car example. This is using a tool called Clever. This is kind of, if you've been shopping for a new car recently, you've probably seen this kind of thing. It's just a presentation of the features of the car. So if I click on this button here, it kind of brings up this graphic here, talks about the engine capacity. If I click on this button here, we have a bit about the fuel consumption. In fact, this menu here allows me to view the same things, but one thing we haven't looked at is the dimensions. I can look inside as well at the car interior. Again, we have these nice graphics highlighting interesting features in the model, so I can go around and interact with the car in 3D and actually explore the actual content. And finally, there's a little kind of configuration tool like with the BMW example. So maybe I want an orange car, maybe I want dark windows, and I can see what that looks like. Another configurator example, this is Penny Skateboards. This is a WebGL content which allows me to design my own skateboard. So I think I'll select the larger skateboard. Let's design the deck. So maybe that kind of colour. I can have a look underneath as well. Yep, that looks nice. The wheels, what colour should I do the wheels? Maybe orange wheels, but perhaps one of those wheels I want a slightly different colour. The trucks, let's do purple perhaps. black bolts. Have a panel on the base, which I think I'll do that colour. And then finally the grip. You know, I've always really fancied a leopard skin skateboard. So there we go. So now I can actually go to the skater mode and I can interact with this and actually wheel my skateboard around and see what it looks like. So again, instead of coming and having a quick look at the website, I've actually spent a long time interacting with the content and I'm a lot more engaged. And here's a final simple example. This one is the Autodesk viewer, and this looks like your kind of classic bootstrap template where you've got some kind of image behind the title to a web page. Except this isn't an image; it's actually a 3D model that I can interact with. I can rotate it around. I can zoom in and out. Potentially even go inside the building there and have a look inside the room. Just show you another one. Since we're on a theme of cars today, I'll just quickly load a car. So here's another one. So it just adds a more engaging, compelling, realistic experience to your web page. Okay, so those are the kinds of things you can do with 3D, and I hope, having seen those, that you're starting to think that 3D is a good idea. So why now? Why are we talking about it now? Well, if I've been talking to you even maybe even 1.5 years ago, it would have been a different story. But over the last year, 2 years, we've reached a stage now where every web browser and every mobile operating system natively supports WebGL now. And anything that natively supports WebGL supports 3D content natively as well. And so, for the first time, you can put your 3D content on your web page and be confident that your customers can actually see it, and that they don't have to download some horrible, huge plugin in order to see it. It just loads, zero client, it just works in the browser. And it's also really simple, and that's what I want to demonstrate during this presentation, just how simple it is to put 3D content on your web page. This is enabled because everything supports WebGL, but you don't have to know anything about WebGL in order to make this work. So the challenge I've set for myself is I'm just pretending that I work for a company, or I've been contracted by a company who's created these amazing new virtual reality goggles. And my job is to create a website to engage customers and to advertise those goggles. And I'm looking at the tools I can use to get the model of the goggles that has been given to me. In actual fact, I downloaded this from a website called Turbo Squid, who sell models. But let's just pretend someone's given this to me. I'm a web designer. I want to get this quickly on the web page and make my web page compelling. And ideally, I don't want to have to write any code to do that. No JavaScript. And I'm going to show you a range of tools of varying complexities, from a complete kind of cheap and cheerful beginner's tool all the way to fully functional comprehensive gaming engines like the Play Canvas that I just showed you, those the BMW i8 demo written in, and just going to show you how to get that single model onto a web page. Just for completeness, I'm looking today at these tools that don't require any coding, so I'm not going to be writing any code today. If you really do love JavaScript and you want to go a bit deeper, get a bit more fine control though, then check out the 3JS library or the Babylon.js library. They're both APIs built on top of WebGL that create a higher level API interface than WebGL gives you, so that you can more easily program in 3D. And of course, if you really love doing it the hard way, I have every respect for people who can program in WebGL, but I just want to make it clear that these days you really don't have to. WebGL obviously gives you the finest amount of control, but you have to write a huge amount of code to do anything, and that's not what we're about on this presentation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of these different technologies, each of these different tools, in a kind of top trump style format. So I've got these traffic lights where obviously green is best, yellow is middle of the road, and red is not so good, and black means not supported at all. And I'm going to look at the different categories. So I'm going to look at ease of use. How easy is it just to get the model onto your web page? How well does it actually import the model geometry? How well does it import the materials associated with the model? And by materials, I mean, the red here is defined as a material. This silver bowl is defined as a material. This band around the object is a different material. So materials import means making sure that the silver is silver and the red is red, and all of that kind of stuff. Documentation, for more complex tools, not really relevant for Sketchfab because it's so simple. But for more complex tools, how well documented is it, so I can actually find out how it actually works. Annotations is actually labeling things in the model that people can click on. A bit like you saw with a clever example when I clicked on those buttons and it showed me the fuel consumption and the engine details. Integration is something you normally would use an API with. This is really how well can you integrate it with the rest of the web page. Can you respond in the viewer to people doing things somewhere else in the DOM, or modify something else in the DOM? As a result of somebody clicking in the viewer, for example. File format support. I mean, ultimately you only want it to support the file format that you're using, but clearly the more file formats that the viewer supports, the better chance you've got of finding content that you want to show. Customizability. By customizability, I'm really thinking changing the behavior or look of the viewer without having to use the API. And then the API automation is, does it have any kind of API at all? Does it have some basic automation? And then finally the price. You'll find that everything has a free tier, and most of the prices except for one instance are all monthly subscription fees, and usually there's actually a tiered fee for various levels of features, and so I'm just going to quote the base price basically, but everything is free, so you can play around with stuff to your heart's content. So let's start with taking a quick look at Sketchfab, and I'm actually going to go through the entire upload process with Sketchfab. So I'm going to go to my Sketchfab account and open that up, and this is a good way actually for me to test the local internet connection to see whether I'm going to be able to, how well my other demos are going to work. And I'm just going to upload my model. So click choose file, and actually the model I'm playing with here is this steampunk goggles model, which is actually an FBX file and a bunch of textures. So the FBX defines the model geometry and the materials that go into the model, but the textures that give the materials their colors are separate files. And in the case of Sketchfab, the easiest way to upload all of that is to zip it up together, because then it automatically applies the textures to the materials for you. So let me just click open, and then it loads the files, and I click continue, and I'm just going to call this, let's call it test, and hit continue. And then we just wait a few moments while it's processing the model. While we're waiting, just so you know, Sketchfab is kind of based as a community where people share their 3D models, so it's a really great place to actually come and download content as well. And obviously for sharing of models, it's important to be able to view them, so Sketchfab have developed this viewer as well. Okay, so models processed, and here are those goggles. Now, what I don't like about this import is that it has left, that's supposed to be leather, but it just looks like cheap plastic for the black stuff. So the materials import isn't perfect here. So what I can do is I can go to settings and click 3D settings, and this gives me a few options. I can modify the scene, the lighting, add annotations, but I'm just going to edit the material, and you just go here and you select the materials. So if I choose casing, for example, which if I rotate that, you can see that's highlighted in purple there, and I can change the specular color for the casing and just reduce that down from 100% to 0, and you can see now that casing, if I zoom in on it, you can now start seeing it's more matte. It's still got a little bit of sheen to it. I can vary that if I want. Oops, but it very quickly becomes too shiny, so I'm going to keep it at 0. But you can see there's a nice leather texture there. So I'll change the casing. Oops, not the stitching. I'll change the strap. Same thing. And there's a lot more you can do to edit the materials in all of these models, but what I'm looking at here is, I want to get things on the web quickly, so I don't want to have to spend ages modifying the model and playing around with it. But you can see now that's kind of looking a little bit nicer now. The metal for me is still a little bit too shiny, but we'll just leave it at that for now. And if I actually go and look at one I prepared earlier, so here is my website advertising my new VR goggles, not associated anyway with the other Steam. And this is what it looks like. All of my models, I'm using iframe embedding. Some of the tools actually allow you to download and locally host the model viewer. That's not the case in Sketchfab. But you can see here it kind of goes into this auto rotate mode. We have these annotations which I can click on, and it's quite simple annotation, just a title and a line of text. I can iterate through those. But it's immediately given me a little bit of interaction. The user can actually, stay and play with a model for a while. It's not just like zoom, pan and rotate. There's a little bit of information in there that I can click around and find. So that's Sketchfab anyway. Next thing I want to show you is Claraio, and whereas Sketchfab, it's really just a viewer, Claraio is actually a full-blown modeling, animation and rendering engine all in the browser. And the thing I really like about Sketchfab, about Claraio, is the materials. It does a much better job, not so much of importing the materials, but of actually rendering the materials than Sketchfab does. So let's just go and take a look at that. So let's go to my Claraio account. And in this case, I've already uploaded the model. I didn't want you to have to sit and watch files uploading all day. So here's the model. And just want to show you what it looks like. So if you've ever used any 3D modeling software, something like 3ds Max, for example, this probably looks very familiar to you. So you've got a huge amount of tools here that you can, if you want, you can construct a model from scratch, or you can import a series of models and compose a scene with them all together. But ultimately what that looks like when I finally share that, and again it's an iframe embed scenario, so I'll just click on the Clara, and here is the model. Now what I'll say straight away is the plastic is a little bit better. It now looks like expensive plastic rather than leather. Before it looked like cheap plastic when I was in Sketchfab. But the thing that's really beautiful here is how it renders the metal. That's a really, really nice rendering of the metal. So this is we're starting to get some much nicer graphics now in our 3D. On the downside though, in this case I don't have the annotations. It does seem to be possible to add annotations in Clara, but I actually couldn't get them working when I did an iframe embed. It's probably something I'm doing wrong. So because I couldn't get the annotations working, it's really just zoom and pan and rotate. Actually just zoom and rotate. Okay, so back to the presentation. That's Clara. So slightly harder to use, but better rendering quality than Sketchfab. The next one, I've already demoed this car example to you, is Clever. And what I'll say about Clever is I've given it a red bar for ease of use because I found the user interface for the editor to be really, really quirky. It's one of these where if you change a value, you have to click away from a field in order to make the value take, and I spent a long time thinking I'd changed a value and then it would just reset itself. So it takes a while to kind of learn to use the user interface, but once you have, the thing it really gives you is actually it does some good file format support, because they actually provide plugins for some of the more popular things like Rhino and Revit and SketchUp. So that you can actually export the models directly from there into Clever. But the thing it does really well compared to all the other models is the customizability, the ability to build a full-blown 3D presentation without invoking any APIs at all. So let's just have a look at my Clever account. So I'll just open up Clever. And again, I've got an example here where I've just uploaded the goggles and not done anything else to them. So I'll just edit that now so you can take a look at it. So here are my goggles. And the way Clever works is it has this idea of different steps in the presentation. And then it has just an insert tab here, and I can insert things like buttons or images or panels. And I'm going to insert a panel. Now a 2D panel just sits at the front and doesn't move, whereas a 3D panel still faces you all the time, but it's actually in a particular point in the model. So I'm just going to insert a 3D panel. I can use my own file if I've already got the graphics, but if I don't, I can use their WYSIWYG editor to create my own panel. Just because I'm demonstrating, I'm just going to take the default. So I have a panel here. I can change the visible angle. Let's change it to about 90 degrees. And that's disappeared because at the moment that panel is kind of facing away from me. So I can twist that around. And now there's the panel. But actually when I rotate this model, you see the panel at certain points just disappears. And then the other thing is that that panel has been defined in this step here. In this step, the panel doesn't exist unless I go back and select that panel and change it to ignore the steps, in which case it's now in this step as well, and again as I rotate it disappears. So I can position it in space, I can choose the angles it's visible from, and I can make it appear and disappear in different particular views. And you can completely through the user interface combine things like menus and frames and panels and buttons, both 2D and 3D, to create your presentation, which you saw with the car presentation I showed you. What that looks like when I embed it in my web page. I had a bit of fun with this one. I created my own mini presentation. So what? Oh, and by the way, actually before I do the demonstration, you'll see on most of these embeds that there is some kind of branding. This, in the case of Clever, this is here because I have a free account rather than a pro account. So generally if you pay that branding, you have an option to remove that branding, but if you take the free version, usually it comes with some kind of branding for the actual viewer. So here's my default presentation. I've added these little buttons, and I've also added the menu here, and they do the same thing. So if I click on this button at the back, it takes me to this step in the presentation here where I'm showcasing the strap, which is also taking me to this step in the menu. Instead of clicking buttons, I can just click in the menu. So it's highlighting how great the lever is. It's highlighting this gear stick here, and I even implemented a little configurator, and this is all non-API stuff. This was all done using the Clever editor, so I can change the colors of my lenses if I want, and then maybe silver lenses, and I can zoom out and see what they look like as silver lenses, and finally go back to the original presentation. In terms of a rendering, you know, it's not bad. I don't particularly like the way it's done the metal. That could do with a bit more sheen. So, you know, if I was really serious about this, I'd go back into Clever and do some more manual editing of the actual materials and the textures to make them look a bit better. But the leather's looking quite nice. It's got a good texture. The stitching's got its nice texture there. So, you know, I'd say that the black here is rendering better, whereas the metal maybe not as good as Clara. So that's Clever. Moving quickly on. The next one I wanted to show you is a little bit of an outlier but it's a desktop application, and so the price that I'm showing you here is actually for a perpetual license. It's not a monthly fee. And this advertises itself as a material editor and rendering engine. So what people are generally doing here is they're taking a 3D model, spending a lot of time editing their materials, and then creating a rendering, you know, basically a photorealistic image. Now, because of the way this works, it actually uses physics-based rendering, which is a bit different than your normal rendering model. It's a little bit harder. The materials import is a little bit more quirky, and it's also a little bit harder to use as well. The viewer itself, it has a viewer component. It does have an API, but basically the API just allows you to embed the viewer instead of using iframe embed, which is the alternative. But let me show you that. So here's the application, a desktop application. Again, I've got a model which I've already loaded into the scene. So if I just take the raw one and open it. Okay, so this is where you see what I mean by the materials import isn't as good. it's imported the materials, but it has not applied the textures to them like we've seen in the previous examples up to now, which means that, you know, although this rim here, it kind of knows that it's a copper rim and the leather knows that it's leather, it doesn't have the textures on there to tell it, you know, what color to display itself. So if I want to do that, I have to, example, click on the casing, go down to albedo, click and select a file. So I'll go to my goggles. In this case it was the leather texture, and select that, and I can go to maybe the buckle at the back, and again set the albedo, and that should be brass. So I can select the textures, and you can see there that, you know, now the buckle is brass. And what this does give you is, if you spend all the time with all of these settings, it gives you an amazing rendering experience. It's just a pain to set it all up, and so that's not really what we're interested in this demo today, because we're trying to do it quick. So let me just show you though what this looks like. So my marmoset example, and it does render really beautifully, but you don't have any opportunity to add any kind of interaction other than, you know, rotate and zoom. And what I'd say here, I haven't set it up so it shows a good texture for the leather. I think the default texture for the metal is quite nice. It's on a par, I think, with the Claraio. So pretty nice. And actually, just as an aside, you might notice here that this is solid here, but when I look at it from the inside, it's actually see-through. I can see all the way through that casing. And this is fairly common thing when you import 3D models into these viewers, is a lot of these textures are one-sided, which means they literally only render when you look at them from one direction. So for quite a lot of these, some of these viewing tools kind of take care of that for you, but other ones you have to actually go in, and there's usually an editing setting you can apply to change the material to being two-sided. But, you know, again, it's quite a nice view, and it's you know, the basics to get it up and running is not too bad. Okay, so that's Marmoset. So now we come to another category of tool, which is the games engine. And, you know, for these you can write complete games. You saw this Seymour animation, the kind of thing you can do. You know, they include physics engines, collision detection, all of that kind of stuff if you want it. I'm not going to use any of that because, fortunately, in terms of creating a 3D view, most of these games engines come with a template that you can select, just a preset template, which is a model viewer template. This one, file support, actually is particularly poor. It only supports 3 different file formats. It doesn't have any plugins to help you import files from elsewhere. The API, obviously, because it's a gaming engine, is amazing, and it is a complete JavaScript engine, Play Canvas, so you can actually, you know, embed this in your own web page and interact with other DOM elements and whatever you want. Annotations I put in black because without programming you don't get any annotations, but the API is so comprehensive that if you're prepared to do coding, you can basically do what you like. I can take this and I can select the casing here. So let's have a quick look at for diffuse Play Canvas. Actually, let me scroll down and find the lever. So again, importing the model is just a case of taking the model and all the materials and just dragging. And again, I've got one of these scenes which I've uploaded the goggles, but then I have to go through this open that up process of adding all of the materials. And you know, this is actually adding the textures, but you know, there's a lot more I can add as well if I want to. I can edit, so I could potentially spend a long time editing this, but you know, as I've said many times already, that's not what this presentation is about. So, oops. Let's have a look at that. Again, if I paid, I could have got rid of this. And this is one of the ones where you can actually download and self-host the entire presentation. So you download it and it comes with all the JavaScript embeds that you need. So in this case, I'm hosting it on the Play Canvas site and I'm iframe embedding it, but I could have self-hosted. You see here, this is their default model viewer template. So it has a certain lighting setup, it has a certain background. You know, it looks kind of nice. The metal is probably about the same, maybe a touch better than it was in Clever. The leather is a kind of nice, oops, difficult to get close enough, a nice material there. It's got a little bit of sheen to it, so it's probably one of the better leather renderings. It's another one that has this one-sided material effect. So that's Play Canvas. Another gaming engine is Goo. That spells goo, honestly. And this one I found was a little bit harder to use than Play Canvas. It seemed to have some of the same quirks as Clever in that you'd edit something and you'd have to click away from the thing you'd edit it for it to take effect. And again, the files format support isn't brilliant. And a little bit expensive, more expensive than Play Canvas as well. Play Canvas, I mean, it has several tiers, but the first paid tier is $15, whereas Goo is $50. And Play Canvas seems to have more kind of photorealistic demos uploaded to its gallery. Goo, most of their demos are more kind of WebGL, HTML5 advertisement kind of demos. But it's still a very, very capable games engine. And again, it's a native JavaScript gaming engine that you can use, embed it in your own page. You can download and self-host the files. I'm not going to show you the editor for that. It is a little bit different than Play Canvas, but honestly, you see one gaming engine editor, you've seen them all really. So let me just show you the embed. And again, you always get they look slightly differently. What the loading screens look like, and this is the default model viewer template. Again, you've got this kind of atmospheric lighting with the light coming in from one side. Actually, I think the default materials rendering is better than Play Canvas. The metal looks a little bit, maybe it's just the lighting that we've got in this template, but it looks a little bit better. The leather is at least as good. Again, you've got the one-sided material effect here. And that's Play Canvas. That's Goo, I mean, sorry. And finally, for completeness, if you're talking about games engines, you have to mention Unity. It's been around so long. It's the one everybody knows. It's got a huge community around it. Because of a huge community, I would say that the documentation is absolutely best in class. The Unity documentation itself is really good, really well written, really comprehensive. But because it's such a big community and it's such a mature product, if you have a question that the documentation doesn't answer, that question has almost certainly been asked and answered before, on the Unity forums or on Stack Overflow or whatever. I've given it a red for ease of use because one thing about Unity compared to Goo and Play Canvas is you cannot even set up a basic model viewer template without writing a bit of code. Just to be able to move the camera around, you need a script. And Unity uses C# as its scripting. It actually runs mono on the Mac for that. But I actually found a script on someone's blog that I copied and pasted, so I didn't actually have to do any coding. I just had to know how to copy and paste the code and set it up as a sort of script attached to the camera. The other thing I'd say about Unity is the default Unity engine is actually still the Unity plugin, which most customers don't like plugins. It does have a WebGL engine, but it's still in preview mode, and the WebGL, the engine is actually generated via Inscriptum, so it's pretty big and takes quite a while to load and has quite a slow load performance. What I would say is you get an awful lot. For the gaming engine, the personal edition, if you qualify for it, is free, is really comprehensive, but it does start to get quite expensive if you don't qualify for the free edition. And they give details of who qualifies on their website. So let me show you the Unity example. So you see straight away this is slow to load. And because it's a personal edition, you do have to have the Made with Unity splash screen. You can't get rid of that. And this is their kind of default template, which is a really horrible background. Like I say, I had to copy and paste a script to make the camera work. And it is a gaming engine, so I could have added a huge amount of extra interactivity, but I'm not interested in that for the purposes of this presentation. The rendering I don't think is quite as good as some of the other ones we've seen. It's a little bit on the low quality side. You can definitely see the anti-alias, the edges there of those lines. So that's Unity. And then finally, we have the Autodesk API, and this one's a bit difficult to describe because it's almost two separate things. There's a viewing technology which you can iframe embed in your own website, but there's also a completely standalone API that allows you to translate files and set up a viewer purely through JavaScript. And the viewer that you iframe embed, there's a free version where you can basically put your files online for 30 days. There's a thing called A360 which costs $10 a month. And the standalone API is free at the moment. The actual pricing model is to be confirmed. So in terms of the iframe embedding, I mean, it's very easy to use. But then, you know, if you're looking at the API, suddenly that becomes a little bit harder, obviously. Documentation, at the moment is not brilliant. That needs a bit more work. Annotations, again, are not possible without using the API. What this really wins for, though, is a file format support. Actually, interestingly, I'm not going to show you the steampunk example using the Autodesk viewer because the two file formats that it's really not very good on are FBX and OBJ. And my goggles are in FBX format. Unfortunately, the viewer completely ignores all of the materials when you import an FBX file, and there's no way to add them afterwards. This is one thing about this viewer. There's no editor capability. What you get is what you get, and if you don't like it, tough, you can't change it. But Autodesk, you know, they create software that allows you to design stuff, be it a house or an engine or whatever, and so they, in their viewer, their big advantage is they support, other than FBX and OBJ, which they support without materials, they support a huge number of other file formats. You know, if you have mechanical file formats, you might have a SolidWorks or an Inventor or a Pro-E or a CATIA file, or you may have, you know, STP or STL or a Revit file or an AutoCAD DWG or a DWF or any of those kinds of file formats. It supports over 70 different file formats. And rather than show you, like I say, the viewer example, I'm just going to give you a quick look at the kind of capability of the viewer, because it's worth considering if you want to show design information to your customers. So this is the free viewer. This is the one where it keeps online for 30 days. The API allows you to customize all of this user interface. And actually they do actually have a Polymer version of the API, so you don't necessarily have to do any coding. You just have to jump through a few hoops to avoid the coding. So here's some of the things you can do. I mean, I can section the house. And this is a house, but you know, there's lots of other models you could show as well. So I can do this kind of sectioning, which, you know, you get for free in this viewer. You don't get that for free anywhere else. So that's sectioning. I can explode, which doesn't make a lot of sense for a house. It makes more of an sense for a mechanical assembly. But I can, you know, pull the house apart and, you know, take a look at the individual components if that's what turns me on. I can click on an object, let's say that window, and I could isolate that window. You know, it grays out the rest of the area, and I've just got that particular object. When I select it and look at the properties, because again this is coming from a design file, in this case it's coming from Revit, it gives me all of the design information about that. So, you know, let's say you're a car manufacturer and you want somebody to have instructions on how to fix your, you know, repair the engine in your car. Well, instead of having, like they have now, a bunch of sheets with two-dimensional isometric drawings of the engine, you could actually have a model of the engine, you know, and they could look at it on their iPad and actually pull the engine apart in real time. You know, the example here is I showed you at the beginning was the LMV Rocks example, which is this. This again is the Autodesk Viewer API. This is actually using Polymer. Here's an example with the engine. We can take that to full screen, and I can actually explode that. This is a different. You see how I've customized the UI here, and it kind of makes more sense now. The explode. Now I'm using a mechanical part, so I can see where all the nuts and bolts go and and all of that kind of thing. Okay, so that's it. That's a flying overview of some technologies that you might be interested in using to 3D enable your web page. Hopefully I've convinced you that 3D is worth doing, and hopefully I've shown you some tools that you can now go away and investigate for yourself. Hopefully at least one of them was interesting to you. My summary is, for people getting started, if you want the easiest possible to use, go with Sketchfab. Cheap and cheerful, very quick, but perfectly effective. For the customizability, definitely clever. You saw how you could construct a presentation completely without an API. For file format support, other than FBX and OBJ, the Autodesk API is the best, particularly because it doesn't just give you meshes and textures, it gives you all of that detailed design information as well. For integration with the rest of your web page, Clever was close here, but I chose Autodesk Goo and Play Canvas for that. And then for the API, if you really want a good API to control everything about the 3D model, you've got to go with one of the games engines. As I say, Unity is C# using Mono on the Mac. Goo and Play Canvas are JavaScript. Okay, and finally, before I go, just some quick tips just to help you along the way. So first of all, something I haven't mentioned during this presentation is when you are putting 3D models on a web page, think of the size. If you had a high-res video and lots of high-res graphics on a 2D web page, it would slow down the load performance. That gets even worse with 3D. If you have some monstrous model with incredibly detailed meshes and incredibly large textures, you're going to see a big performance here, and potentially you'll actually break your browser on a mobile device which doesn't have very much built-in memory. For all of these, pretty much all of the things I showed you, if you pay to go pro, you can remove the branding, so you're not advertising someone else's product on your web page. If you're looking at file formats, if you have a choice, for everything except the Autodesk viewer, FBX is the best. Probably OBJ is the second best. And then where do you get the models from? That's a frequently asked question. It's like, okay, I can 3D enable a web page, but where do I get the stuff? Well, there's several things you can do, but you can create your own models if you really want to. So I showed you Claraio. That is a fully functional editor. I showed you Play Canvas and Goo and Unity. They also allow you to create, to a certain extent, to create your own models and play, have fine control over textures and meshes and things. There's also another couple of products from Autodesk which I'm just mentioning because they're free. There's the 1-2-3D range, which allow you to create simple 3D objects, and then Fusion 360 is a completely free professional mechanical design application. So you might want to check some of those out if you want to create your own models. The other way is to download stuff. So if you're displaying on your website something that from another manufacturer that has been built, then they will somewhere have designed that, so they will have the file. So you can look on their website. They quite often have the design somewhere on their own website. Obviously, if you've designed the product yourself, you've already got the file. But if you want just more generic content, sites like TurboSquid and Sketchfab, and there's plenty of others as well, give you lots of selection of 3D models to get you started. So, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.